The stagecoach rattled to a stop, dust clouds billowing around the weathered wooden structure that served as Fort Collins' only proper station. Lydia Zimmerman clutched her threadbare valise to her chest, heart pounding as she stepped down onto Colorado soil for the first time. The year was 1878, and the bustling frontier town was supposed to be her salvation, not another chapter of heartbreak. 2 hours later, she sat alone on a wooden crate near the station's back entrance, tears streaming down her face, her carefully penned letters clutched in one gloved hand. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, as if the western sky itself was testing her resolve. "Miss, are you all right?" Lydia looked up through tear-blurred eyes to see a tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun. A man stood before her, hat in hand, concern etched across features weathered by sun and wind. His dark mustache twitched slightly as he waited for her response. "I'm afraid not, sir," she managed, hastily wiping her tears with her handkerchief. "My intended husband seems to have changed his mind." The man's expression hardened. "James Holcomb," Lydia nodded, surprised. "You know him?" "Everyone knows Holcomb," he said darkly, "and his way with promises." He extended his hand. "Mason Rutherford, I run the supply store and freight business north of town." "Lydia Zimmerman," she replied, accepting his handshake. His palm was calloused but warm. "I traveled all the way from Pennsylvania to marry a man who isn't even here to meet me." Mason's eyes, the color of a clear summer sky, studied her thoughtfully. "Your journey doesn't have to end here, Miss Zimmerman. My wagon's headed north tomorrow morning. I could take you to my sister's place while you figure things out." Lydia hesitated, clutching her valise tighter. "I don't know you, Mr. Rutherford." "No, you don't," he agreed. "But I reckon sleeping in my sister's spare room beats crying on a crate." A slight smile softened his face. "Your journey ends with my wagon, Miss Zimmerman, but perhaps something better begins." Something in his steady gaze made Lydia believe him. "When do we leave?" she asked. "First light," Mason replied, offering his hand once more. "Let me help you find somewhere to stay tonight." Lydia accepted his hand and stood brushing dust from her skirts. As they walked toward town, she realized she'd stopped crying, her mind already turning to tomorrow's journey and whatever lay beyond. The modest hotel room Mason secured for her was plain but clean. After he left with a promise to collect her at dawn, Lydia sat on the edge of the narrow bed, unpinning her honey-brown hair from its travel-weary bun. She opened her journal and wrote, "Today marks the end of one dream and perhaps the beginning of another. Pennsylvania feels a world away, and James Holcomb's promises have proven as substantial as morning mist. Yet a stranger's kindness has given me hope. Tomorrow I travel north with Mr. Rutherford. Lord, guide my path." Sleep came fitfully, her mind filled with images of Mason Rutherford's steady gaze and the unknown path ahead. Morning arrived in shades of amber and gold. Lydia dressed carefully in her second-best traveling dress, a practical navy blue that had weathered the journey well. She pinned her hair in a simpler style than yesterday's elaborate arrangement, acknowledging the practicalities of frontier travel. Mason was waiting outside as promised, his wagon loaded with supplies. Beside him stood a younger man with similar features. "Miss Zimmerman, this is my brother Theo," Mason said. "He'll be joining us for the first part of the journey." "Pleased to meet you, miss," Theo said, tipping his hat. He couldn't have been more than 20, with a friendly, open face that immediately put Lydia at ease. "How far are we traveling?" Lydia asked as Mason helped her onto the wagon seat. "About 4 days, if the weather holds," Mason replied, climbing up beside her. "My sister Emma lives near Laramie in Wyoming Territory." The wagon lurched forward, and Fort Collins began to recede behind them. Lydia felt a strange mixture of relief and trepidation watching the town disappear. James Holcomb had described a comfortable home with servants and promised she'd want for nothing. His letters had painted a picture of devotion and longing. How easily she had been deceived. "May I ask what happened?" Mason's voice broke into her thoughts. "With Holcomb, I mean," Lydia sighed. "His letter said he'd meet me at the station, When he didn't appear, I asked around. The station master told me Mr. Holcomb had married a banker's daughter from Denver 3 weeks ago. Mason shook his head. I'm sorry. Holcomb's always been more ambition than character. The station master said he's done this before, Lydia said quietly. Apparently, he writes to multiple women, then chooses the one with the largest dowry. That sounds like Holcomb, Mason agreed. Though I'm surprised he's still finding women who don't know his reputation. Pennsylvania is a long way from Colorado, Lydia said, and I was desperate to leave. Mason didn't press, instead pointing out landmarks as they traveled a distinctive rock formation, a creek that never ran dry even in summer, a distant mountain peak named after a local legend. By midday, they stopped to rest the horses and eat a simple meal of bread, cheese, and dried apples. Lydia found herself relaxing in the brothers' company. Theo was full of stories about life in the West, while Mason was quieter but attentive, ensuring she was comfortable. What made you decide to become a mail-order bride, Miss Zimmerman? Theo asked as they resumed their journey. Theo, Mason admonished, that's a personal question. It's all right, Lydia said. My father died last year, leaving significant debts. Our house and belongings were sold to pay them. I was working as a seamstress, but the wages barely covered my room and board. She twisted her hands in her lap. When I saw Mr. Holcomb's advertisement seeking a refined Eastern lady to share in frontier prosperity, it seemed like providence. Holcomb has a way with words, Mason said grimly, but not much else. What about you, Mr. Rutherford? Lydia asked, eager to change the subject. Have you always lived in Colorado? Born in Missouri, Mason replied. Came west after the war, tried mining, ranching, and finally settled on freight and supplies. People always need things brought in and taken out. As the afternoon wore on, the landscape changed, becoming more rugged. They passed fewer homesteads and more untamed wilderness. By evening, when they made camp beside a small stream, Lydia felt as though they'd traveled to another world entirely. Theo built a fire while Mason tended the horses. Lydia, determined not to be idle, unpacked the food supplies and prepared a simple stew using dried meat and vegetables from Mason's stores. You didn't have to cook, Mason said when he returned to find dinner nearly ready. I'm not helpless, Mr. Rutherford, Lydia replied with a small smile. And I prefer to earn my keep. They ate around the fire, the night air growing cool as darkness fell. Theo entertained them with stories of local characters and frontier mishaps, until Mason reminded him they had an early start tomorrow. Mason offered Lydia his bedroll inside the wagon, while he and Theo slept outside near the fire. Lying beneath unfamiliar stars, listening to the night sounds of the wilderness, Lydia reflected on how completely her life had changed in just 24 hours. The next 3 days fell into a pattern. They rose with the sun, traveled until midday, rested briefly, then continued until evening. Lydia learned the rhythm of the trail, when to brace herself for rough terrain, how to spot landmarks, the importance of conserving water between streams. Theo left them on the second day, heading west to deliver supplies to a mining camp. Been nice traveling with you, Miss Zimmerman, he said as he departed. Hope you find what you're looking for. Alone with Mason, Lydia found herself opening up more. She told him about her childhood in Pennsylvania, her love of books, her mother's death when she was 14. In turn, Mason shared stories of his time as a Union soldier, his journey west, the years of hard work to build his business. What about Emma, your sister? Lydia asked on the third evening as they sat beside their campfire. What should I expect? Emma's got strong opinions and a soft heart, Mason said, stoking the fire. She came west as a war widow with her daughter, Rose, who's 12 now, married Thomas Miller 5 years back. Good man, runs a successful ranch. And she won't mind a stranger appearing on her doorstep, Mason smiled. Emma's been trying to marry me off for years. She'll be delighted to have a new project. Lydia laughed, then quickly sobered. I don't want to be anyone's burden, Mason. I'll need to find work. We'll figure something out, he assured her. Laramie's growing. They need seamstresses, teachers, all sorts of folks. On the morning of the fourth day, as they were breaking camp, Lydia noticed Mason frowning at the western sky. "Problem?" she asked. "Weather's changing," he replied. "We should reach Emma's by nightfall, but I don't like the look of those clouds." They traveled faster that day, stopping only briefly to rest the horses. By mid-afternoon, the wind had picked up, carrying the scent of rain. Dark clouds loomed ahead, occasionally illuminated by distant lightning. "We're not going to outrun it," Mason finally admitted, pulling the wagon off the trail toward a stand of trees. "We need to find shelter and wait it out." They barely had time to secure the wagon and horses beneath the densest part of the grove before the storm hit with savage intensity. Rain lashed down in sheets, driven by howling wind. Thunder cracked overhead, and lightning split the sky in jagged patterns. Inside the wagon, Lydia wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, trying to stop her trembling. She had never experienced a storm of such ferocity. "You all right?" Mason asked, climbing in beside her, water streaming from his hat and coat. "I've never seen anything like this," she admitted. "Western storms can be fierce," he said, removing his dripping hat. "But they usually pass quickly." This one, however, showed no signs of abating. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped sharply. Lydia could hear the horses whinnying nervously outside. "I should check on them," Mason said, reaching for his coat. "Be careful," Lydia urged, surprising herself with the depth of concern in her voice. Mason returned soaked to the skin, his face grim. "One of the horses broke free. I've secured the other, but we're not going anywhere until I find him." "You can't go looking now," Lydia protested. "It's too dangerous." "We'll wait until morning," Mason agreed reluctantly. "But it means we won't reach Emma's tomorrow." They spent an uncomfortable night in the wagon, the storm raging around them. By morning, the rain had diminished to a steady drizzle, but their situation had not improved. The missing horse was nowhere to be seen, and the trail had turned to mud. "We have two choices," Mason said as they shared a cold breakfast. "Wait here hoping the horse returns, or continue with one horse, which will be slow going." "Could we walk to your sister's?" Lydia asked. Mason shook his head. "It's still 20 miles at least, too far in these conditions." He rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "There's a line shack about 5 miles north. Belongs to the Circle M Ranch. We could shelter there until conditions improve." 5 muddy, miserable miles later, they reached the line shack, a crude but solid structure used by ranch hands during cattle drives. Inside was Spartan but dry. A small stove, a rough table with 2 chairs, and a narrow cot. "Not exactly the accommodations I promised," Mason said apologetically as he lit the stove with wood from a small stack beside it. "It's dry and has a roof," Lydia replied, trying to wring water from her sodden skirts. "That's luxury enough right now." Mason unloaded essential supplies from the wagon while Lydia attempted to create some order inside the shack. By afternoon, they had a fire going, dry clothes hanging from improvised lines, and hot coffee brewing on the stove. "You're remarkably resilient, Lydia Zimmerman," Mason observed as they sat at the small table, warming their hands around tin cups of coffee. "Necessity," she replied with a small smile. "Though I admit this isn't how I imagined my Western adventure." "Me neither," Mason agreed. "I promised Emma I'd be there yesterday. She'll be worried." "Could you ride to her place and come back for me?" Lydia suggested. Mason shook his head. "I won't leave you alone out here. There's a homestead about 10 miles west. Once the trail dries a bit, I'll go there and see if I can borrow a horse or send word to Emma." They spent a quiet evening by the stove's warmth, talking of small things, favorite books, childhood memories, hopes for the future. Lydia found herself studying Mason's face in the flickering light, noting the laugh lines around his eyes, the thoughtful set of his mouth, the way his hair curled slightly at his collar. "What?" he asked, catching her gaze. "I was just thinking how differently things might have turned out if Mr. Holcomb had met me at the station as promised," she said. "I would never have known you existed. Would that have been a loss?" His tone was light, but his eyes held a question. "I believe it would," she said softly. Morning brought clearing skies and a visitor. Lydia was hanging their now dry clothes outside when she heard hoofbeats approaching. A rider appeared, a young ranch hand from the Circle M, surprised to find the line shack occupied. "Mr. Miller sent me to check for storm damage," he explained after Mason introduced them. "He'd be happy to lend you a horse, Mr. Rutherford." "Thomas Miller?" Mason asked. "Emma's husband," the young man nodded. "Yes, sir. Ranch is just 15 miles northeast, Mrs. Miller mentioned her brother was expected. Within the hour, they were packed and traveling again, the ranch hand leading the way. By mid-afternoon, they crested a hill to see a sprawling ranch below neat fenced pastures, a large barn, and a comfortable 2-story house with a wide porch. A woman emerged from the house as they approached, shading her eyes against the sun. Behind her stood a tall man and a young girl. "That's Emma," Mason said, smiling broadly, "and Thomas and Rose." Emma Rutherford Miller proved to be a feminine version of her brother's same blue eyes and direct gaze, but with a warmth that immediately put Lydia at ease. "We've been worried sick," she scolded Mason, then turned to Lydia with a welcoming smile. "And you must be Miss Zimmerman. Mason's message said you needed a place to stay." "Your brother has been very kind," Lydia said. "I'm grateful for your hospitality." "Nonsense," Emma replied, linking her arm through Lydia's. "Any woman smart enough to avoid James Holcomb is welcome in my home." The Miller house was comfortable, rather than grand, a home built for family, rather than show. Rose, a serious girl with her mother's blue eyes, showed Lydia to a pleasant bedroom overlooking a kitchen garden. "Uncle Mason says you came all the way from Pennsylvania," Rose said, helping Lydia unpack her few belongings. "I did," Lydia confirmed. "It was a very long journey. Were you scared, coming west alone?" Lydia considered the question. "Sometimes, but I was more afraid of staying where I was." That evening at dinner, Thomas Miller, a thoughtful man with kind eyes, asked about Lydia's plans. "I need to find work," she replied honestly. "I have some skills as a seamstress and I've done some teaching." "Laramie's school needs a teacher," Emma said. "The last one left to get married." "But term doesn't start for 2 months. "I've been thinking," Mason interjected. "The store in Fort Collins needs help with the books and correspondence. It would be temporary, but it would give you time to decide what you want to do." "Are you offering me a job, Mr. Rutherford?" Lydia asked, surprised. "If you're interested," he replied. "The position comes with a room above the store, small but private." "I'd like that very much," Lydia said, relief washing over her. "Thank you." Later, sitting on the porch while Emma put Rose to bed, Mason explained further. "I've been wanting to expand the business. Open a second store in Laramie, maybe. But I need someone I trust running things in Fort Collins." "You hardly know me," Lydia pointed out. "I'm a good judge of character," Mason replied. "And I've seen how you handle unexpected challenges. That's worth more than experience." For the next week, Lydia settled into life at the Miller Ranch. She helped Emma with household tasks, played checkers with Rose, and learned about ranch operations from Thomas. Each evening, she and Mason would sit on the porch, watching the sunset and talking of their plans. "When do you need to return to Fort Collins?" Lydia asked on their 6th evening. "Soon," Mason admitted. "But I was thinking we could stop in Laramie first. Let you see the town, meet some people. It might help you decide if you want to settle there eventually." "That's thoughtful of you," Lydia said, touched by his consideration. "Practical," Mason replied with a slight smile. "If you're going to help run my business, you should know the territory." The next morning, Emma found Lydia in the garden picking beans for dinner. "You've brought quite a change in my brother," Emma said, kneeling beside her with a basket. "How so?" Lydia asked. "He's talking about the future," Emma replied. "Mason's always lived day to day since the war. Making plans, building something lasting that's new." She gave Lydia a meaningful look. "And I think it has something to do with you." "We're just friends," Lydia said, feeling her cheeks warm. "Business associates, really." Emma replied skeptically. "And I'm Queen Victoria." 2 days later, Mason and Lydia departed for Laramie, promising to return for Rose's birthday in August. The journey was considerably more comfortable than their previous travels, with clear skies and a well-sprung buggy borrowed from Thomas. Laramie proved to be larger than Lydia expected, a proper town with several streets of businesses, a schoolhouse, church, and even a small theater. Mason introduced her to several merchants, the schoolmaster, and the editor of the local newspaper. "What do you think?" he asked as they ate lunch in a small restaurant. "It's more established than I expected," Lydia admitted. "I could see myself teaching here." Mason nodded, looking pleased. "The town's growing fast, railroads bringing new people every day." He hesitated. "I've been looking at a building on Main Street, good location for a store." "You're serious about expanding?" "I am," he confirmed. "But I'd need someone I trust in Fort Collins while I get things established here." Lydia found herself studying him across the table, this man who had literally picked her up when she was at her lowest point. In just 2 weeks, he had become someone whose opinion mattered to her, whose company she enjoyed, whose rare smiles she treasured. "I'd be honored to help," she said finally. They returned to the Miller Ranch that evening, and preparations began for their departure to Fort Collins. Thomas found Mason's missing horse, which had made its way to a neighboring ranch. Emma insisted on sending Lydia with additional clothing and household items to get properly established. The night before they were to leave, Lydia found Mason alone on the porch, staring at the stars. "Penny for your thoughts," she said, joining him at the railing. "Just thinking about chances," he replied. "How things happen that seem bad at the time but lead to something better." "Like being jilted by a mail-order groom," Lydia suggested with a wry smile. "Exactly that," Mason agreed. "If Holcomb had been there to meet you, we'd never have spoken." "I'm beginning to think it was a stroke of luck," Lydia admitted. Mason turned to face her, his expression suddenly serious. "Lydia, I want to be clear about something. The job offer is genuine. There's no expectation attached to it." He cleared his throat. "What I mean is, I don't want you to think I'm offering Holcomb's type of arrangement." "I never thought that," Lydia assured him, touched by his concern. "I know you're a man of honor, Mason." "Good," he said, relief evident in his voice, "because I value your friendship and your opinions. You see things differently than I do. It's refreshing." They departed for Fort Collins the following morning, the wagon now considerably more loaded with Emma's generous provisions. The journey that had taken 4 difficult days on their first trip was completed in a comfortable 3, with overnight stays at proper way stations. Fort Collins looked different to Lydia this time, no longer the site of crushed dreams but a place of new beginnings. Mason's store, Rutherford Supply and Freight, occupied a prime corner location on the town's main street. A separate entrance led to stairs ascending to what would be her new home, a small but tidy apartment with 2 rooms and a tiny kitchen. "It's perfect," Lydia declared after Mason showed her around. "It's small," he corrected, "but the price is right." The next few weeks passed in a whirl of activity. Lydia learned the store's operations, met the regular customers, and began organizing the chaotic bookkeeping system. Mason introduced her to reliable townspeople and warned her about those less trustworthy. Evenings were often spent in the store's back office, heads bent together over ledgers and inventory lists. Word spread quickly that Mason Rutherford had brought a lady from back east to help run his business. Speculation ran rampant, with most assuming they were secretly engaged. Lydia found these rumors mortifying, but Mason seemed unbothered. "People will talk," he said when she mentioned it. "Best just to ignore them and do our work." Easier said than done, Lydia discovered, especially when the minister's wife made pointed inquiries about their intentions, or when female customers suddenly found reasons to visit the store more frequently, eyeing Lydia with undisguised curiosity. More troubling was the day James Holcomb himself sauntered into the store, clearly intrigued by reports of Lydia's new position. He was handsomer than she remembered from his photograph, tall, well-dressed, with carefully styled hair and a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Zimmerman," he said, removing his hat with a flourish. "I must apologize for our missed connection. A business emergency called me to Denver unexpectedly. Mr. Holcomb, Lydia replied coolly. I believe congratulations are in order on your recent marriage. His smile faltered briefly. Ah, yes. Life takes unexpected turns, doesn't it? I see you found employment with Rutherford. His gaze swept the store dismissively. Quite a step down from what I offered, but perhaps it suits your temperament. It suits me perfectly, Lydia replied. Now, unless you're here to make a purchase, I have actual customers to attend to. Holcomb's face darkened. You should be grateful I didn't meet you at that station, Zimmerman. From your letters, I expected someone more refined, more attractive. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. Rutherford must be desperate for help if he's settled for you. Is there a problem here? Mason's voice cut through the tension as he emerged from the storeroom. Just greeting an old acquaintance, Holcomb said smoothly, replacing his hat. Good day, Miss Zimmerman. Rutherford. After he left, Mason turned to Lydia. Are you all right? Fine, she said, though her hands were shaking. He's exactly as despicable as I imagined. Mason's expression was grim. Holcomb's wife already regrets her choice. Word is he's gambling away her inheritance. He hesitated. Lydia, what he said was designed to hurt, she finished. And doesn't matter. She straightened her shoulders. I have inventory to complete. That evening, Mason knocked on her apartment door. When she opened it, he stood awkwardly in the hallway holding a small parcel. I thought you might need this, he said, handing her the package. After today. Inside was a beautifully bound copy of Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen, which she had mentioned was her favorite novel. Mason, she breathed, running her fingers over the embossed cover. This is too much. It's not enough, he said. Not after what Holcomb said. Lydia, you should know, he stopped, seeming to struggle for words. You're the most capable woman I've ever met, and one of the finest people. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Before she could respond, he nodded awkwardly and retreated down the stairs, leaving Lydia staring after him. The book clutched to her chest. As summer progressed into autumn, the store prospered under their combined efforts. Mason made several trips to Laramie, finalizing plans for the new store location. During his absences, Lydia ran things smoothly, earning the respect of even the most skeptical customers. She also began making friends in town, the schoolteacher's wife, the milliner, a young widow who ran the bakery. She joined the Ladies' Literary Society and offered to help with costumes for the Harvest Festival. Slowly, Fort Collins began to feel like home. Mason returned from his latest trip to Laramie on a crisp October evening, his face alight with excitement. It's done, he announced as they closed the store. Sign the papers today. Rutherford Supply and Freight will open in Laramie next month. That's wonderful news, Lydia exclaimed. You've worked so hard for this. We've worked hard, Mason corrected. I couldn't have done it without you, Lydia. Which brings me to my next question. He took a deep breath. Would you consider coming to Laramie to help establish the new store? Lydia's heart skipped. What about Fort Collins? Theo's agreed to take over here, Mason explained. He's ready for more responsibility. I see, Lydia said, trying to hide her disappointment. She had grown attached to Fort Collins, to her little apartment, to the rhythms of the store, to seeing Mason every day. When would you need me to leave? Leave. Mason looked confused. I'm asking you to come with me to Laramie. Permanently, as my partner in the business? Yes, Mason said, unless you'd prefer to stay here. No, Lydia said quickly. I'm just surprised. It's a generous offer. Mason ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Lydia had come to recognize as a sign of nervousness. There's something else I should say, something I've been wanting to say for some time. Lydia's pulse quickened. Yes, I've grown. Very fond of you, Lydia, more than fond. The words came out in a rush. I find myself thinking of you constantly when I'm away, missing your voice, your laugh. The way you frown when you're concentrating on the ledgers. Mason, please let me finish, he said. I know this isn't what you came west for. You wanted security, a home of your own. I'm offering you a business partnership because I respect your abilities, but I'm hoping. That is, I wonder if you might consider a more personal partnership as well. Lydia felt as though her heart might burst from her chest. "Are you proposing, Mason Rutherford?" "Doing a poor job of it," he admitted with a rueful smile. "But yes, I love you, Lydia. I think I have since I found you crying on that crate." Lydia crossed the space between them, placing her hands on his chest. "I love you too, Mason. I've been afraid to admit it, even to myself." "After Holcomb, I'm not Holcomb," Mason said fiercely. "I know," Lydia replied. "You're the man who said my journey ends with your wagon. You couldn't have known how right you would be." Mason's kiss was gentle at first, then deeper as Lydia responded with all the emotion she'd been holding back. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "Is that a yes?" Mason asked, his voice husky. "Yes to everything," Lydia replied. "Partner, wife, whatever you need me to be." "Just be Lydia," Mason said, stroking her cheek. "That's all I've ever wanted." They were married 2 weeks later in the Fort Collins church, with Emma, Thomas, and Rose making the journey from Wyoming for the ceremony. Theo stood as Mason's best man, beaming with pride at his new role as store manager. After the wedding, they departed for Laramie, beginning their journey as husband and wife in the same wagon that had brought them together. "Seems fitting," Mason said as Fort Collins disappeared behind them. "Coming full circle." "Not a circle," Lydia corrected, leaning her head on his shoulder. "A new beginning." The new store in Laramie opened on schedule, quickly establishing itself as a vital part of the growing community. Lydia and Mason purchased a small house near the edge of town, with enough land for a generous garden and perhaps, someday, a nursery. By spring, the Rutherford business had expanded to include a mail-order catalog, largely Lydia's creation, which brought goods from the east to isolated homesteads throughout the territory. Mason focused on the freight operations, while Lydia managed the retail aspects and correspondence. As the first anniversary of their meeting approached, Mason surprised Lydia with a gift, a small, ornately carved wooden crate. "What's this?" she asked, running her fingers over the detailed pattern. "Open it," Mason urged. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a silver locket. When Lydia opened it, she found a tiny photograph of them on their wedding day. "To remember where we started," Mason explained, "and how far we've come." "It's beautiful," Lydia said, tears pricking her eyes as Mason fastened it around her neck. "There's something else I need to tell you," she said, taking his hand and placing it gently on her abdomen. "We're going to have a baby." Mason's expression transformed from surprise to wonder. "A baby," he whispered. "When?" "November, the doctor thinks," Lydia replied. "Just in time for winter." Mason gathered her in his arms, his joy palpable. "I never thought I could be this happy," he confessed. "When I saw you at that station, all I wanted was to ease your pain. I had no idea you'd become my whole world." Their son, James Thomas Rutherford, was born on a snowy November night. As Lydia held him in her arms, Mason beside her, she reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought them to this moment. "What are you thinking?" Mason asked, gently touching their son's tiny hand. "That sometimes our greatest disappointments lead to our greatest joys," Lydia replied. "If James Holcomb had been the man he claimed to be in his letters, I would have missed all of this." "Then I owe Holcomb a debt of gratitude," Mason said, kissing her forehead. "Though I still think he's a scoundrel." "The worst kind," Lydia agreed with a smile. "But he led me to the best man I've ever known." As their first year of marriage turned into 5, and their family grew to include a daughter, Helena, the Rutherford business expanded further. They opened a third store in Cheyenne, with Theo managing it while maintaining his interest in the Fort Collins location. Lydia's mail-order catalog became widely known throughout the Western Territories, bringing necessary supplies and small luxuries to remote ranches and homesteads. Mason's freight business grew to include contracts with the railroad and territorial government. On quiet evenings, they would sit on their porch, watching their children play in the yard, marveling at the life they had built together. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if you hadn't found me that day?" Lydia asked one such evening, her head resting on Mason's shoulder. "Sometimes," Mason admitted. "But then I remember what Emma always says." "What's that?" Some people are just meant to find each other, Mason replied, pulling her closer. No matter what. In the spring of 1889, more than a decade after that fateful meeting at the Fort Collins station, the Rutherfords hosted a celebration marking the opening of their newest venture, a proper department store in downtown Laramie. The mayor attended, along with most of the town's prominent citizens. During the festivities, Emma pulled Lydia aside. "Did you ever imagine this?" she asked, gesturing toward the elegant new store with its plate glass windows and electric lights. "When you were sitting on that crate crying your eyes out?" "Never," Lydia admitted. "I was just hoping to survive." "And look at you now," Emma said proudly. "Businesswoman, mother, pillar of the community." Later, as they walked home under a canopy of stars, Mason took Lydia's hand, his touch still sending a thrill through her after all these years. "Happy?" he asked. "Completely," she replied. "Though sometimes I still can't believe how it all began." "With a broken heart and a crate," Mason remembered. "And ended with your wagon," Lydia finished. "Or rather, began again." As they approached their home, lamplight glowing in the windows, their children waited on the porch, eager to hear about the grand opening. Lydia felt a wave of gratitude wash over her for the twists of fate, the disappointments and challenges, and most of all, for the man beside her, who had transformed her journey's end into a beginning more beautiful than she could have imagined. "You know," Mason said as they climbed the steps to their porch, "I think we should keep that crate." "We already did," Lydia reminded him, touching the locket that still hung around her neck. "It's part of our story." "The best story," Mason agreed, drawing her close, "and we're still writing it." As James and Helena rushed to greet them, chattering excitedly about their day, Lydia exchanged a look of pure contentment with her husband. From despair to joy, from a crying mail-order bride to a woman fulfilled in every way that mattered, her journey had indeed ended with his wagon, only to begin the most meaningful adventure of her life. And in the years that followed, whenever someone asked how they met, Mason would always begin the tale the same way. "She was sitting on a crate, crying her heart out, and I told her, 'Your journey ends with my wagon.'" Then Lydia would add, with a smile that still captivated him, "And that's when everything beautiful began."